details of the Russian plot trickled out, Baca became certain that a Trump presidency posed an existential threat to the nation. The vote of the electors was the last thing standing between Trump and the Oval Office, and Baca was determined to keep him from ever getting there. The good news was that the Constitution's framers had anticipated exactly this scenario. They knew that most people would not be well informed about national candidates and feared they would be easily taken in by a smooth-talking con artist. The Electoral College was the solution. In the Federalist No. 68, Alexander Hamilton wrote that the college would ensure that the office of president will never fall to the lot of any man who is not in an eminent degree endowed with the requisite qualifications. How? By entrusting the choice of the president to a select body of men in each state, men who would possess the information and discernment requisite to such complicated investigations. These electors, Hamilton assured his readers, would be most capable of analyzing the qualities adapted to the station and acting under circumstances favorable to deliberation. In other words, Hamilton was saying that the electors would think for themselves, reject unqualified candidates, however popular they might be, and choose a leader who would govern in the best interests of the nation. Inspiring words, and in the days after Trump's victory, more than a few shell-shocked liberals latched onto them. Baca and Chiafalo dubbed themselves Hamilton electors and began working to persuade their Republican counterparts not to vote for Donald Trump, but instead unite behind a compromise candidate who was actually qualified for the job. As anti-Trump protesters took to the streets around the country, blocking traffic, chanting "Not my president," and clashing with police, a quieter protest was developing largely behind closed doors. An unprecedented, loosely coordinated national effort to vindicate the framers' vision, reverse the outcome of the election, and save the republic. A petition posted on change.org that called on conscientious electors to protect the Constitution from Donald Trump by switching their votes from Trump to Clinton drew nearly 5 million signatures. Michael Signer, the mayor of Charlottesville, Virginia at the time, and the author of books about demagogues and James Madison, published an article in Time magazine arguing that Republican electors owe it to all Americans to deliberate on their choice in the manner required by the Constitution. In short, to revolt against Trump. A Harvard law professor named Lawrence Lessig said he had been told of 20 Republican electors, and possibly more, who were considering voting for someone other than Trump, although none ever publicly came forward. A short video posted to YouTube and viewed more than 1.4 million times featured a solemn parade of TV and movie stars pleading with Republican electors to switch their votes. It opened with Martin Sheen, donning his spectacles and summoning the benevolent didacticism of his alter ego, President Jed Bartlett of the West Wing, a liberal's fantasy chief executive who could recite the Federalist Papers in his sleep. As you know, Sheen said, after quoting Hamilton, our founding fathers built the Electoral College to safeguard the American people from the dangers of a demagogue. The rest of the celebrities seem to be trying to strike a tone somewhere between dire and apocalyptic. I'm not asking you to vote for Hillary Clinton, several of them repeated. Any eligible person would do. They assured the electors that by voting their conscience, they would go down in history as brave and heroic patriots. The overall effect sounded like a group of hostages trying to sweet-talk their kidnapper into putting down the gun. The problem was that the Electoral College has almost never operated as Alexander Hamilton pictured it would. Not since 1792 have electors been independent, deliberative actors who saw their task as picking the fittest person for the job. There isn't even one single body of electors. Instead, each presidential candidate has his or her own slate of electors, tapped by local party leaders for nothing but their partisan loyalty. Whichever candidate wins a state's popular vote sends all of his or her electors to the state capitol, where they cast their ballots for that candidate. And just in case any of them should get a notion to vote for someone else, most states have laws prohibiting them from doing so. In other words, electors are today, as they have nearly always been, obedient partisan hacks, rubber stamps for their party's candidate. But none of that mattered in the fall of 2016. By later November, it seemed as though Democrats had entered a fugue state. Sure.